A strange feeling of clarity comes when you realize that your life was built on trust that turned out to be a trap. My name is Robert. I am 70 years old. For almost 4 decades, I taught forensic psychology at Harvard. I wrote thousands of pages about manipulators, psychopaths, and how the human mind can fall prey to deception. I considered myself an expert who could never be caught off guard. But on a cold November evening in my cozy apartment on Charles Street, the phone rang, and that call shattered my confidence in my own infallibility. It was my younger brother, Arthur. Arthur is 68, and he is the complete opposite of my world of numbers and facts. He is a restorer of antique folios, a man who feels life through the smell of old leather and the texture of parchment. He has always been a quiet, somewhat detached bookworm whose hands worked wonders with 18th century editions. But the voice I heard did not belong to Arthur. It was the cracked whisper of a man on the verge of an emotional breakdown. "Robert," he whispered, and I heard him gasp for air. "I don't know what's real anymore. They say I'm losing my mind. Please come while they're gone." My blood ran cold. In all our 60-odd years together, Arthur had never sounded so desperate. He had always been a pillar of calm. 30 minutes later, I was standing in front of his mansion in Cambridge. The house had always been warm, filled with the aroma of coffee and vanilla, but now it seemed like a cold red brick tomb. When Arthur opened the door, I almost cried out. My brother, always fit and neat, had lost a good 20 pounds. His eyes were sunken, his skin had taken on an unhealthy grayish hue, and his hands, which had once been able to meticulously restore the most delicate pages, trembled so badly that he could barely hold the door handle. He looked every bit of 85. We went into his study. It had once been a sanctuary of knowledge, filled with rare books and tools. Now the room seemed sterile and alien. The photographs of our parents and pictures of our sailing trips together had disappeared from the walls. In their place hung a huge, provocative portrait of Susan and her mother, Evelyn. Susan was 55 years old and had come into Arthur's life 5 years ago, a stately, cold woman with impeccable manners who seemed the perfect match for a widowed restorer. 3 years ago, her mother, Evelyn, now 75, moved in with them. With her arrival, the house became a high-security zone. It all started with concern. "Robert," Arthur whispered, constantly glancing at the door as if expecting a blow. Susan said my eyes were too weak for work, that I was damaging valuable books. Then Evelyn started noticing that I forgot to turn off the gas or mixed up the days of the week. They kept a log of my mistakes. Every time I tried to argue, they would look at each other with such pity that I began to doubt my own memory. Arthur told me a story that was scarier than any criminal case I've ever handled. It was a surgically precise campaign to destroy his identity. Susan, 55, took complete control of his finances, convincing him that at his age it was dangerous to manage such assets. She transferred his business accounts to her name. Meanwhile, Evelyn, 75, a former nurse, methodically fed him vitamins and sedatives that left him constantly dizzy and confused. They isolated him from his friends, answering all calls with the phrase, "Arthur is not feeling well today, he is resting." Every word, every meal, every movement was criticized and controlled. From being the master of the house, he became a frightened guest, graciously allowed to live out his life in exchange for complete submission. I looked at my brother, and two people fought inside me. A loving brother who wanted to call the police immediately, and a cold psychology professor who understood that the police would see no crime here. To the outside world, Susan was a devoted wife caring for her fading husband, and Evelyn was a caring mother-in-law spending her old age surrounded by family. In the justice system, psychological abuse and gaslighting are harder to prove than burglary. There were no bruises here, only a broken psyche. "Arthur, you have to trust me like you've never trusted anyone in your life," I said, taking his icy, trembling hands. "We've always been confused. Even our maternal genes played a joke on us, making us almost identical. Now your weakness will become our strength. You need to leave, but the house can't be left empty." If they notice your disappearance, they'll destroy all the evidence and declare you a madman on the run. My plan came together instantly, nurtured by years of studying criminal strategies. I decided to use our striking resemblance. I, Robert, a man of sharp mind and iron will, was to become the broken Arthur for a time. While my brother recovered at my country house in Berkshire Hills under the protection of my former students from the security service, I would take his place in the golden cage. But before making the switch, I called on my old connections. While Susan and Evelyn were enjoying their superiority, my private investigator, Rita, began digging into their past. The results were staggering. Susan, 55, was not a successful investor at all. Her career in Miami ended with a series of bankruptcies and lawsuits from elderly clients whose trust funds evaporated as soon as she got signing authority. And Evelyn, 75, she had her nursing license revoked in Oregon for systematically stealing powerful drugs from the hospice's medicine cabinet. They were professional predators looking for a safe haven with decent capital. Arthur, with his workshop and antique books, was simply a living ATM for them, which they decided to slowly gut, robbing him of his mind and will. The switch took place on Monday morning. Boston was covered in cold, stinging rain, perfectly reflecting my mood. Susan and Evelyn left for the city center for a charity lunch hosted by the Society for the Preservation of Historical Heritage. Ironic, considering how they were destroying living history in the form of my brother. As soon as their Lexus disappeared around the corner, I entered the house with 2 suitcases. We quickly changed clothes. Seeing Arthur in my clothes was strange. He looked like a little boy wearing his father's jacket. Remember, Arthur, no phone, no internet, no contacts. Just eat, sleep, and listen to the forest. Your job is to get yourself back. My job is to destroy them. I hugged him tightly, and for the first time in a long time, I felt his shoulders stop shaking. When they returned at 6 p.m., I was already sitting in Arthur's chair in his dark workshop. I put on his old, dusty robe, slumped over, pretending to be submissive, and deliberately did not turn on the light. I heard their voices even before they entered. They did not hide their contempt, thinking that the old man would not understand anything anyway. God, Lydia, this house smells of old age and rotten books. Evelyn's, 75, voice sounded in the hallway like the creak of an unlubricated door. Let's get the formalities over with and move to Palm Beach. Be patient, Mom, replied Susan, 55, in her icy, businesslike tone. The psychiatrist is coming on Wednesday. One report of progressive dementia and all of Arthur's accounts will be at my complete disposal. He's almost ready. Yesterday, he couldn't even remember what he had for breakfast. They entered the workshop. Susan flicked the switch, and bright light hit my eyes. I didn't move, continuing to stare at the floor with that same absent look I had seen so often in victims of deep trauma. Arthur, are you sitting in the dark again? Susan approached me, her steps heavy and confident. We agreed. The light must be on so that you don't confuse reality with shadows. Have you taken your drops? She handed me a glass of cloudy water. I took it with a trembling hand, imitating my brother's tremor, but inside me pure adrenaline was pulsing. I could smell her perfume. Expensive, tart, smelling of power. Evelyn stood in the doorway, her arms crossed over her chest, watching me like a biologist watching a frog being dissected. At that moment, I realized they didn't just want his money. They enjoyed watching him slowly wither away. They felt like gods, controlling someone else's mind. But they didn't know yet that sitting in that chair was not a victim, but a hunter who had come for their souls. I spent the first 2 days in almost complete silence, diligently playing the role of Arthur. I ate their tasteless oatmeal, feigned slight disorientation, and listened obediently to Evelyn's lectures on how my brain was deteriorating. This was necessary in order to gather irrefutable evidence. A tiny voice recorder was hidden in Arthur's robe, and a camera was embedded in the button of his home jacket, transmitting everything that was happening to Rita's secure server. I recorded everything. how Susan forged Arthur's signature on the documents transferring ownership of the antique collection, how Evelyn mixed a cocktail of benzodiazepines into his water to keep the patient in a vegetative state. On the third day, I decided it was time to change the rules of the game. The moment had come for what psychologists call pattern disruption. When Susan, 55, entered the office with another stack of papers to sign, I didn't slouch as usual. I sat up straight, looking out the window at the gray waters of the bay. "Arthur, dear, you need to put your name here, on the workshop insurance," she said in her usual saccharine tone, which had a hint of steel in it. "You don't want your precious books to burn without protection, do you? Insurance." I turned slowly toward her, and my voice didn't have the usual Arthurian fear in it. "That's strange, Susan. I checked our accounts on the tablet you left in the kitchen. It turns out you've been transferring money from the workshop account to an offshore account in Panama for a month now. Why would a book restorer need an account in Panama?" Susan froze. Her face, usually impeccably cold, flinched for a moment. She was used to Arthur barely being able to form a sentence, but here he was operating with facts she hadn't even suspected. You dreamed that, Arthur," she replied quickly, trying to regain control. "What tablet? You don't have any passwords. It's your hallucinations, dear. Mom, come here, he's getting worse again." Evelyn, 75, floated into the room, already clutching a syringe tube with a sedative in her hand. "Conspiracy theories again, Arthur," she hissed, approaching me. "It's time to calm down. These thoughts are destroying what's left of your memory. Give me your hand." "No injections today, Evelyn," I said, rising from my chair. My height and sudden confidence caused them both to unconsciously step back. I called Dr. Hammond at Massachusetts General. He's coming tomorrow to do a full toxicology analysis of my blood. I want to know why my vitamins are causing symptoms of chemical lobotomy. No one slept that night in the house on Beacon Hill. I heard their frantic whispering in the kitchen. They were panicking. Their perfectly constructed world, where the victim was just a passive body, was beginning to crumble. They couldn't understand how a broken man had regained his clarity of mind and will in a single day. "We've waited too long, Mom," Susan hissed. "We should have taken him to the clinic a month ago. If Hammond comes and finds these drugs in his blood, we're finished." "Calm down," Evelyn replied, and in her voice I heard the very cruelty that had once cost her her license in Oregon. "Tomorrow morning we'll say he had an aggressive episode. We'll call our ambulance. By the time Hammond gets to him, he'll be in a closed ward where no one will listen to his ravings. We just have to wait until morning." I listened to this, sitting in the darkness of my bedroom, and smiled. It was a trap they had set for themselves. They didn't know that Dr. Hammond was my former colleague and that the state police had already received a package of documents from Rita. At 7 o'clock in the morning, Susan entered my room. She was wearing a travel suit, her lips pressed tightly together. "Arthur, get up. We're going for an examination. This is not up for discussion. You need professional treatment. You have become a danger to yourself and to us." I got up silently and began to get dressed. Evelyn stood in the doorway, clutching Arthur's heavy cane in her hand, in case the patient rebelled. We went down to the living room, where two burly men in white coats were already waiting, private transport hired by them. "Take him away," Susan ordered coldly. "He'll resist. Tell him he's delirious." One of the orderlies approached me, but I simply raised my hand. "Just a moment, gentlemen," I said, and my voice filled the living room like the tolling of a bell. "Lydia, Evelyn, did you really think there was only one old man living in this house?" I stood up straight, squared my shoulders, and took off Arthur's glasses. At that moment, the front door swung open. Instead of their doctors, Boston police detectives entered the house, accompanied by Rita. "Susan Miller, Evelyn Clark, you are under arrest on suspicion of financial fraud, unlawful imprisonment, and systematic poisoning of a person," the officer said. Susan's face turned ashen. She looked from me to the police, then back at me. "Arthur," she muttered. "No, dear. I smiled the very smile that once made criminals pale in Harvard interrogation rooms. Arthur is having breakfast in Berkshire right now, and I am Robert, and I just read you your last lecture on the psychology of retribution. The living room of the Beacon Hill mansion fell silent, the silence so thick you could cut it with a knife. Susan, 55, stood with her hands pressed to her chest, her eyes darting from me to the police officers, as if she were trying to find some loophole in the reality that had just shattered into pieces. Evelyn, 75, reacted differently. She tried to hide the syringe tube in the folds of her expensive cashmere cardigan, but Rita, my detective, was quicker. "I wouldn't advise that, Evelyn," Rita said coldly, grabbing her hand. "This sample will be key evidence. Officer, take this for analysis. It's a complete set of the sedatives they used to poison Mr. Thornton." Susan finally found her voice, but it was no longer icy and confident. It was the squeal of a cornered animal. "This is some kind of mistake. This man is an imposter. He broke into our house. He kidnapped my husband. Arthur is sick. He's insane." I took a step forward, and my voice rang out with the power that once silenced entire courtrooms. "There's only one mistake here, Susan. You thought that age was weakness. You thought that if a man loved books and silence, he could be trampled underfoot. But you forgot that he had a family. I am Robert Thornton, and for the past 3 days, I have documented your every breath, your every attempt to forge a signature, and every drop of poison your mother slipped into your food." While the detectives read them their rights, Rita laid a thick folder on the table. "Susan, we found your accounts in Panama. We found documents from Miami. And for you, Evelyn, we have a special surprise. The Oregon police have confirmed the warrant. That case at the hospice 10 years ago, it's not closed. Did you think that changing states and your daughter's last name would save you? In a world of digital fingerprints, it's impossible to hide." When the handcuffs snapped shut around their wrists, Evelyn looked at me with such hatred that the temperature in the room seemed to drop. But I didn't care. I watched as they were led out of the house they had turned into a prison. I watched as the Lexus, bought with Arthur's money, drove away behind the police van. For the first time in a long time, it was easier to breathe in that house. The sterile smell of their power began to fade, giving way to the smell of old wood and hope. 2 days later, I drove to Berkshire Hills to pick up Arthur. My country house, surrounded by centuries-old oak trees, had always been a place of healing. When I entered the living room, I couldn't believe my eyes. Arthur was sitting by the fireplace with a book on his lap, but he wasn't reading it. He was watching the fire. His face was still thin, but the gray hue had disappeared. Next to him was a tray of normal food: homemade broth, fresh bread, and fruit. His body, freed from Evelyn's chemical fog, was beginning to recover at an astonishing rate. "Robert." He stood up to meet me. His gait was still unsteady, but he was no longer slouching, trying to become invisible. "Are they gone?" "They're not just gone, Arthur. They're never coming back. Susan has been charged with grand fraud and unlawful imprisonment. Evelyn is awaiting extradition to Oregon. Your accounts are under my temporary control until we restore all the documents. You are free." Arthur closed his eyes, and a single tear rolled down his cheek. These were not tears of grief. They were the tears of a man who had returned from a long, dark captivity. "I thought I was really going crazy," he said quietly. They said it so convincingly. Every day, 100 times. I began to believe that my memories were delusions and that their care was my only salvation. "That's the essence of their evil, brother," I replied, putting my arm around his shoulders. "They didn't just steal your money. They tried to steal your reality. But now you're safe. We have a lot of work ahead of us. Your workshop is waiting for you. Your books are waiting for you. And most importantly, your life is waiting for you." We spent the next few weeks together. We walked in the woods, restoring his physical strength. I watched as his appetite returned and the tremors in his hands disappeared. We began to sort through his affairs. It turned out that Susan, 55, had managed to withdraw about $300,000, but thanks to Rita's quick intervention, most of it was frozen. Arthur's workshop was in disrepair, but the foundation of his business remained intact. His old friends, whom Susan had kept away from his home for years, began to visit us. They brought wine, books, and their stories, filling Arthur's life with the noise he had been missing so much, the noise of real human closeness. The trial in Boston was the final chord in this dark symphony. Susan, 55, and Evelyn, 75, tried to play their roles until the very end. Susan portrayed herself as a victim of circumstances and a woman confused by love, while Evelyn played the frail old woman whom her tyrannical son-in-law wanted to put behind bars. But against the facts we had gathered, their acting was powerless. I was sitting in the front row of the courtroom when Arthur testified. It was the most important moment of his healing. He no longer whispered or looked down. He stood up straight, and his voice, though quiet, sounded with the calm confidence that only the truth can give. When the prosecutor showed the hidden camera footage, the very moments when Evelyn, with an icy smile, slipped poison into his water, and Susan methodically convinced him that he was insane, the courtroom fell silent. The judge, a gray-haired man who had seen a lot in his career, looked at the defendants with undisguised disgust. The sentence was harsh but fair. Susan received 10 years for financial fraud and kidnapping. Evelyn, given her past in Oregon and the severity of her crimes against Arthur, was sent to prison for the rest of her life. At the moment the sentence was announced, Susan looked at Arthur for the first time, not with contempt, but with animal fear. She finally understood that the old man she considered her property was stronger than all her lies. We left the courthouse, and Arthur took a deep breath of the cold Boston air for the first time in 3 years. There was no malice on his face, only endless relief. The trap had not just been opened, it had been destroyed. A year has passed. I am sitting on the porch of the mansion on Beacon Hill again. But now this house does not feel like a tomb. The windows are wide open, classical jazz is playing in the living room, and the aroma of fresh coffee and cinnamon wafts from the kitchen. Arthur has returned to his books. His hands are firm again, and his gaze is clear. He has gained weight, returned to playing tennis, and, most importantly, has begun to trust people again. His workshop is thriving. Now he takes on young apprentices, sharing with them not only the secrets of restoring parchment, but also the secrets of restoring their own souls. He often tells them, a book can be restored, even if its pages are eaten away by time and mold. The main thing is to preserve the spine, the foundation. It's the same with people. If the foundation, the truth and the love of loved ones, is intact, everything else can be fixed. I look at my brother and realize that this has become the most important thing in my life. 40 years in psychology did not give me as much understanding of human strength as these few months of fighting for Arthur. We, the generation of 70-year-olds, often feel written off, but this story has proven that wisdom and loyalty to family are weapons against which no manipulator is powerful. We did not just survive. We won. Life doesn't end at 70. It just sheds everything unnecessary, leaving only what really matters in the economy of the soul. And now, looking at the sunset, we know that there are still many pages ahead, and each of them will be written by us. This story is a reminder to everyone. Violence does not always leave scars on the body. Sometimes it tries to erase your very identity. But as long as you have a voice to call for help and loved ones who are ready to listen, there is always a way out. If this story of Robert and Arthur touched your heart or reminded you of how important it is to protect your loved ones, please subscribe to this channel. We share these stories so that no one feels alone in their struggle. Like this video so that it reaches those who are currently in a golden cage and think there is no escape. Your click could be someone's first step to freedom. And please leave a comment below. Have you or your friends faced psychological pressure? What do you think helps to keep a clear head in such situations? I read every comment you leave, and your stories make our community stronger and wiser. Share this video with your friends and family. You never know who might need these words of support right now. Thank you for being with us. Take care of each other and remember, Truth is always stronger than darkness.